Okay. Well, don't have a box, but Citadel of Blood. Um, yeah, I mean, this was one I had since the beginning, and or close enough to, and I've never really gotten much enjoyment out of it. I mean, I've gotten the most enjoyment I've ever gotten out of this playthrough. Let's talk a little bit about components first. There aren't a lot. I found the rulebook, like most SPI rulebooks, reasonably good. I've never liked the ones where they put the bold print on them, which were, I think, intended for more of the adventure game hobby type people or beginners and whatnot. I know it showed up in Napoleon's Art of War as an example, along with most of the Ares stuff. It distracts for me. There was at least one thing where I could not find what I expected. In terms of the traps and detrapping section, does not actually mention something that's mentioned back in the sequence of play in the trap phase. There's a trap check, roll a d6 to determine whether or not the door is trapped. On a roll of 1, it is trapped. Minor thing, right? You know, it's elsewhere in the rolls. It's findable. I ended up screwing up, though, and would have probably had a very much worse time because I thought all doors were trapped, which really would have been horrible in terms of tediousness. But other than that, I found the rulebook okay. There are things one would want, you know, reproduce, and you could do this in a homemade copy, reproducing the charts and tables on some kind of card stock or something so that you can have easier access to it. You need to have character sheets for all your characters, and there's a fair amount of writing, etc. in there. I think there are ways that could be represented better. You need additional sheets of paper for the encounters that you have and any monsters that you capture or whatever, and other information. I found a little box where I kept the XP was a useful little idea because everybody's got the same experience points. In a way, everybody kind of could just have the same money too. You could just collect up the money and split it up at the end. It's not like there are monsters that eat you and all your possessions or anything like that in this particular game. So probably the biggest factor is using little cardboard chits for all the tile sections as well as the monsters. And some of the charts didn't have as much information as they might on them, I think. So for example, the monster chart provides you with the resistance value. It provides you with the information that's not on the counters. It does not give you what's on the counters, which is somewhat problematic in that it's a pain in the ass to hunt down the particular monsters that you want and find the counter that you want. There's no easy way because they're double-sided and there's different things on different sides of different monsters. So you're not going to just automatically be familiar. And in a lot of cases, you're facing a single monster and you probably don't actually need a counter to put on the board. You could just represent them however. You know, with the larger types, with the monsters that there's larger quantities of, those are easy to find. Those are going to be all gathered together in one group. So that's not really a problem when you actually do need more than one monster. You would need to leave monsters behind sometimes on the board, and then you would have to fish them out. But for the most part, you wouldn't really need to. I'm very bothered by the tiny little chits that you're exploring. Again, you could make a different type of game out of it, but they're helpful in the fact that you draw them out of a cup. They're annoying in the idea that they're just so tiny, and the map you're creating is pretty tiny, and then the counters that go on top of the map are the same size as the pieces of the map. I don't know how much to fix that. That's kind of what the game's about, and maybe the only good thing about the game is that you randomly determine the rooms and corridors and whatnot by just drawing them out of a cup. Although there's not a lot of detail to any of them. All right, the play of the game. So, I'm not a fan of solo games. I like them better when I play them with other people, and this is one that I never played with other people, but in part because I just didn't really see much point to it. If I wanted to do a role-playing type thing with other people, I usually could find a couple of buddies in such a case, and we would do role-playing. If as another option, which I tried, and I don't own, Hero Quest, which kind of uses the same GM type situation as a role-playing game would, but is sort of a lighter, closer to this type of game where you're just exploring a dungeon and dealing with it. I didn't find there's not much here to really recommend it. It's approximately the same thing that you could get out of the D&D random dungeon generation system, which is not something anybody would want to use, but when I first got D&D, I fiddled around with it a little bit as a way of, ooh, I can, level up my own characters and have fun with this, and maybe I'll be able to convince people to play. And I convinced my parents to play, of all people. Because they were the people I gamed with at that point, to any kind of games. And then, and they didn't really, I don't know. My dad didn't like it. My mom kind of got a kick out of it, but didn't like certain aspects. And eventually I ended up running, for kids my age, which was really cool. But the idea of just sort of slogging through a dungeon like this is not a really appealing thing to me. There's not a lot of excitement and story in this. But if this is the kind of game that you wanted to play, and I have some tastes in this direction. Otherwise, I wouldn't have picked up Gloomhaven, although I intended to play it with my wife. But and Dungeon Degenerates and all these other types of games where you interact with the system in order to fighting monsters and stuff like that. If you did want to play something along these lines, this one is a little bit cumbersome. Well, no, it's a lot cumbersome. The combat system works in a manner that when you're facing weak enemies, and that might, or not particularly potent enemies, there aren't a lot of answers. They can overwhelm you with numbers and beat the shit out of you. And if you face a couple of sets of such in a row, there's not much you can do about them. They're going to drain your resources, your hit points that you're going to have to heal up using a cumbersome healing system, but which, if it didn't have certain limits on it, would allow you to infinitely heal everybody. But that's neither here nor there, because basically you expend hit points to heal more hit points than you expend by a little bit. And you could just cycle through all your characters and they would never get ill. So they had to put a limit on that. I found a lot of the aspects of it, the pre-made heroes, not particularly an appealing aspect to it. I would rather be making my own heroes that I could min-max, come up with ideas for a system. I would rather there be more randomness, though, in the generation of those characters, kind of like there is in, say, a D&D game where you roll, 3 dice for each of your stats, then figure out what you're going to do with them. Instead of, like, basically you have a big set of fixed characters, a whole huge list, which takes up, a whole page of information here, takes up a pile of these counters, and then those become your only decent characters. I kind of feel more like I'd rather own my characters, not be using someone else's. It does have this kind of combination of decent characters and lousy characters. You have 3 decent characters from that list and 3 lousy characters that you kind of own. There's not a lot of room for a campaign here. You've got this one mission to accomplish, and you can keep going back. Valkenburg Castle has the same thing, a single mission that you want to accomplish. But in Valkenburg Castle, it's a big mission. Here, what I was able to do was to go in once and succeed. Probably the only time I've ever managed that in the game, as far as I know. But I may have quit the game early other times I've played. Yeah, it's just not that exciting for me. It's something that I already had a better version of in terms of the D&D randomizers, in terms of other games that, well, I don't think I had anything that was a good random dungeon exploration on a standalone before this came out. So, all right. And it felt tedious, it felt difficult other times that I played it. This time it felt remarkably easy, but I also think I got very, very lucky in my playthrough, which improved my opinion of the game a little bit. At least sometime, like, I felt like it was almost impossible because I would meet something like the final battle that I fought a couple times in a row and just be like, I can't even beat up the lousy shit, the crappy orcs or whatever. Well, this time I got very lucky and managed to meet a couple of potent monsters. And that may actually be a strategy that you want to follow. Go with the charm skill, and there may be other strategies as well, but the charm skill seems like it's almost a cheat compared to other things, which is one of my issues, which is that the game's not particularly balanced. It's not like you have a bunch of different weapon choices, each of which has an advantage or a disadvantage. There's basically, oh look, the hammer is a little better than the axe, which is a little better than the sword. Well, yeah, it's a little bit better than the sword. And the bow's a missile weapon, and it's significantly better than the thrown dagger. And all of these are better than the dagger, and you're allowed 2 weapons. And like, if you end up with a hero from the fixed characters who has stupid weapons, you can't do anything to fix that. But actually, your starting characters also kind of have fixed weapons. They come with a bonus in either axe, sword, or bow. And that's it. The experience system allows you to improve a different weapon, but the weapons aren't better enough to be worth switching your weapon. And you pretty much always want to use the same weapon and just invest whatever points you have or whatever into that as much as you can. Finding magic items is kind of cool, but it's very, very risky. Exploring, the dungeon can find you cool stuff again, but again, it can be very, very risky. A little bit of bad luck, you're screwed. I know, it's the solo game type of thing. It's like, you gotta make them hard enough so that it's not just trivial to do, right? And there's nothing in it that allows you to configure your capability to say, I want to play on easier mode. And then if you beat that, you say, okay, I'm going to tune it up a little bit, like more modern games have. But honestly, was actually baked into D&D. The big difference between like this and doing a random dungeon in D&D, first of all, you have to deal with these stupid shits instead of rolling dice and drawing it on paper. Of course, you don't need graph paper. You've got your chits and whatnot with it. But secondly, the rule system for this is so much less than like a D&D system. And the real question I always had with this game is, what was SPI trying to reach for? They were trying, at this point in time, to reach for the D&D gamers, the role players, the people who were flooding the adventure game hobby, but weren't into war games yet, and to kind of squeeze their little fingers in and try to get them excited into that. Well, this is a poor substitute for even the solo D&D system as far as I'm concerned. And certainly way worse than things like, I never played Tunnels and Trolls, which was a solitaire role-playing game. But like RuneQuest had significant numbers of solo modules that you could play. Traveler had solo adventures you could play. I'm trying to think. Even Rollmaster and Middle Earth both had solo things that you could do. But those would all leverage all the advantages of the system. They might limit your choices and everything. They were kind of, especially the MERP and Rollmaster stuff, was kind of choose your own adventure books, but that you would end up in playing combat or making skill checks and whatnot. And in a large extent, the RuneQuest ones were similar to that. I don't remember what, again, I didn't play Tunnels and Trolls, so I don't know what that was like. But yeah, this just seems like a real pale shadow. And from what I heard, Death Maze is actually just a watered down version of this. It was like the original, and then they added a little bit with the Hellgate. In a way, there might have been better campaign rules for that. I don't know, because one of the real problems with this is like, okay, I saved the world, now what? And I saved the world with 3 special adventures that are like, people from the SPI role-playing groups campaign, and 3 characters of my own that were really shitty and I don't give a shit about at all. They have virtually no stats or anything like that. So yeah, I really didn't enjoy this very much at all. I had my moments of pleasure in it, there's no question. And I guess I can see some people nowadays or whatever fiddling around with it and playing it and getting a kick. I know there are more solo gamers nowadays who want to play solo systems and are willing to like put up with all the negatives that are involved in that. But it's just really not for me. I would rather pick up, something else by far. And it's never been a game for me. Anyway, yeah, I'm glad I got it out of the way. Let's just put it that way. I don't know what the hell I'm doing next. Don't ask me. I don't have anything prepped. I pulled something out to choose, but that probably means a fairly hefty rules investment if I choose to do that before, instead of maybe pulling something out that I'm more familiar with. And I'm also having uglier thoughts, but anyway, send it up. Not much to say about it. It ain't a great game. Don't expect too much from it. Like fun. There are people who have their enjoyment of it. But I got one guy who says he had to mod it heavily. Well, you could just make your own game then. I mean, you really could. And I'm thinking that there are things that you could mod with some of the ideas here of like the party going to campaign or whatever. Things like Cave Evil or stuff like that. Instead of playing by the rules of Cave Evil, create more of an adventure game out of that. I don't know, because that was kind of like a Whiz War type game where, much better, but where you know, have a handful of cards and whatnot that you're trying to beat the enemy, kind of like you would in any opposed game. But it reminded me a lot of Whiz War. I've gotta play that again, because I've got I don't even know what it's called. It's like Marcaves or something like that. It's like an expansion to it, and I've got more than one expansion to it. That, I actually bought the one, but um, it's kind of funny because when I ordered that and got it, or when I ordered it, the guy who runs the company, who had been a fan of mine or whatever, had ended up, you know, saying, "Hey, we'd send it to you for free." And I was like, no, I want to make sure that you guys get it published, so I'm willing to, you know, put the money in for it or whatever, you know, on a pre-order type basis or whatever. I know I want this. I don't need it to be sent for free. And I don't know if that was the last. He sent me a couple more things after that, but nothing afterwards. And I kind of get the feeling that maybe he felt insulted that I like wanted to pay. I don't know. I hope not. It's not my intention, man. I just anyway. Here's Citadel of Blood, and now it goes back in the file cabinet. And I will guess I do not ever play it again.